The rope bit into Margaret's palms as she hauled the plow across the rocky Montana soil, her father's old mare having gone lame 3 days prior, and there was no money for a replacement, nor time to wait for healing. The year was 1879, and the late spring sun beat down on the small farm outside Jerome, Montana territory, where the Prescott family had been barely holding on since Margaret's mother had died 2 winters back. Margaret was 20 years old, though her hands told the story of someone much older, calloused and scarred from dawn to dusk labor that would have broken most men twice her size. She refused to let the farm fail, refused to let her father's grief consume everything they had built. So she worked while he sat on the porch most days, staring at nothing, a shell of the man he had once been. The furrow stretched behind her, uneven but serviceable, and Margaret wiped the sweat from her brow with the back of her hand, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. Her dark hair hung in a braid down her back, coming loose in wisps around her face, and her faded blue work dress was patched in so many places it was hard to tell what was original fabric and what was repair. She was not a small woman, standing tall at 5 feet 8 inches, with broad shoulders and strong arms that came from years of labor, but she was still just one person trying to do the work of 3. The sound of hoofbeats made her pause, squinting against the sunlight to see a rider approaching along the dirt road that led past their property. Visitors were rare this far from town, and Margaret felt a flutter of concern. Since her mother's death, her father had become unreliable, sometimes not speaking for days, other times raging at shadows. She had learned to handle most situations herself, but she kept a rifle near the barn just in case. The rider slowed as he neared, and Margaret could make out more details. He was young, maybe 25, sitting easy in the saddle on a paint horse that looked well cared for. He wore typical cowboy gear, leather chaps over worn denim, a tan shirt, and a hat pulled low against the sun. What caught her attention was the way he was looking at her, not with the dismissive glance most men gave her, but with something that looked like respect. "Afternoon, miss," he called out, touching the brim of his hat. "Saw you working from the road. That is some impressive plowing you are doing." Margaret straightened, suddenly aware of how she must look, covered in dirt and sweat. "Thank you," she said, her voice rough from disuse. She did not talk much these days except to her father, and he rarely answered. The cowboy dismounted, moving with an easy grace that suggested he was comfortable in his own skin. "Name is Isaac Turner. I have been working at the Double R Ranch about 15 miles east, but I am looking to move on. Heard there might be work around Jerome." "Not much work around here," Margaret said, moving to lean against the fence post. Her legs were shaking from the effort of pulling the plow, but she would not show weakness to a stranger. Most folks barely have enough to keep themselves going. Isaac nodded, his eyes traveling over the farm, taking in the sagging barn roof, the overgrown vegetable garden, the general air of neglect that came from too few hands and too little money. "Looks like you could use some help here," Margaret bristled. "We are managing just fine." "Did not mean any offense," Isaac said quickly, holding up his hands. "It is just that I saw you pulling that plow yourself, and I thought maybe your horse was sick or lame." "Lame," Margaret admitted. "Should be better in a week or so." Isaac glanced at the field, then back at Margaret. "A week is a long time to lose during planting season. If you miss your window, the whole year could be lost." She knew he was right, but pride kept her from agreeing. "Like I said, we are managing." "I am sure you are," Isaac said, and there was no mockery in his voice, just genuine respect. "But maybe you could manage better with some help. I could work for a few weeks, help get your crops in, fix some things around the place. Would not even need to pay me cash, just room and board." Margaret's first instinct was to refuse. They did not need charity, and she did not need some cowboy feeling sorry for her. But then she looked at the field, at how little she had accomplished in 3 hours of backbreaking work. And she thought about the other fields that needed plowing, the fence that needed mending, the barn roof that would not survive another winter without repair. Pride was one thing, but losing the farm was another. "I would need to talk to my father," she said finally. Isaac nodded. "Of course, I can wait." Margaret walked toward the house, her legs protesting every step. Her father was where she expected him to be, sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, staring out at nothing. Thomas Prescott had been a strong man once, a good farmer, a loving husband and father. But her mother's death had broken something in him that Margaret could not fix, no matter how hard she tried. "Pa," she said gently, "there is a cowboy here looking for work. Says he would help us get the crops in for just room and board." Her father did not respond, did not even look at her. "Pa, I need your help with this. I cannot do everything myself." Still nothing. Margaret felt the familiar frustration rising in her chest, the helplessness that came with watching someone you love disappear inside themselves. She swallowed it down, like she always did. "I am going to hire him," she said. "We need the help, and he seems decent enough." Her father's eyes flickered just for a moment, and he gave the slightest nod. It was the most response she had gotten from him in weeks. Margaret walked back to where Isaac was waiting, still standing by his horse. "All right," she said. "You can stay in the barn loft. It is clean and dry. Meals are at sunrise, noon, and sunset. We do not have much, but you will not go hungry." Isaac's face broke into a smile, and Margaret noticed for the first time how handsome he was, in a weather-worn, honest sort of way. His eyes were green, the color of new grass, and when he smiled, lines crinkled at the corners. "Thank you, miss. I promise you will not regret this." "It is Margaret," she said. "Margaret Prescott, and that is my father on the porch, Thomas." Isaac glanced at the porch, taking in the older man's vacant stare. "Pleased to meet you both. Should I get started right away?" "The plow needs to be unhitched," Margaret said. "I need to check on the chickens and start on supper." "I can handle the plowing," Isaac said. "You have been at it for hours. Let me take over." Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to prove she did not need help, but her hands were bleeding where the rope had rubbed them raw, and her whole body ached. "All right," she said. "But tomorrow we work together. I will not have you thinking I am some delicate flower who cannot pull her weight." Isaac's smile widened. "Miss Prescott, I just watched you pull a plow across a rocky field for 3 hours. I would never make the mistake of thinking you were delicate." Something in his tone made Margaret's cheeks flush, and she turned away quickly. "Supper is at sunset," she repeated, and walked toward the chicken coop, feeling his eyes on her back. The next few days fell into a rhythm. Isaac proved to be a hard worker, up before dawn and working until the light failed. He was also good with his hands, fixing the chicken coop door that had been hanging crooked for months, patching holes in the barn wall, and working alongside Margaret in the fields. They did not talk much at first, both focused on the work, but gradually conversation began to flow. Margaret learned that Isaac was from Kansas originally, the youngest of 5 brothers. His family had a small ranch, but there was not enough land to divide 5 ways, so he had struck out on his own at 18. He had worked various ranches throughout Kansas, Nebraska, and now Montana, learning everything he could about horses, cattle, and farming. He was 24 years old, though his sun-weathered face sometimes made him look older. "What brought you to Montana Territory?" Margaret asked one afternoon as they worked together to mend a section of fence. "Heard there was opportunity here," Isaac said, hammering a post into the ground. Land is cheaper than down in Kansas, and there is room to spread out. Figured I might save up enough to buy my own place someday. It is hard land, Margaret said. The winters are brutal and the growing season is short. But the land is beautiful, Isaac said, looking out at the mountains in the distance. And the people who make it here, they are tough. They are survivors. He was looking at her when he said that last part, and Margaret felt that flush creeping up her neck again. She was not used to being looked at like that, like she was someone worth admiring. "Tell me about your mother," Isaac said gently. "If you want to, I mean." Margaret was quiet for a long moment, focusing on wrapping wire around the fence post. "She was the strong one," she said finally. "Pa was a good farmer, but Ma was the heart of this place. She kept the books, managed the household, worked in the fields when needed. She could do anything she set her mind to." "Sounds like her daughter," Isaac said quietly. "I am not half the woman she was," Margaret said, and there was pain in her voice. "She got sick 2 winters ago, some kind of fever. The doctor from Jerome said there was nothing he could do. She lasted 3 weeks, and then she was gone. Pa has not been the same since, and you have been running this farm by yourself. Somebody had to." Isaac reached out and gently took the wire from her hands. She looked up in surprise and saw compassion in his green eyes. "You are allowed to be tired, Margaret. You are allowed to need help." Something in her chest cracked, just a little. She had been holding herself together for so long, being strong because she had to be, and here was someone telling her it was all right not to be. Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them back furiously. "We should get back to work," she said, her voice rough. Isaac nodded and handed the wire back to her, but his hand lingered on hers for just a moment longer than necessary. That night, Margaret lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about Isaac's words. She thought about the way he looked at her, not with pity but with respect. She thought about how much lighter the burden had felt this past week, sharing the work with someone who was capable and willing. She thought about his smile, and the way her heart seemed to beat faster when he was near. She was falling for him. The realization should have scared her, but instead, it felt like something blooming inside her chest, warm and hopeful. She had not allowed herself to think about love or marriage or any kind of future beyond the next harvest. But here was Isaac Turner, a cowboy passing through, making her think about possibilities. The next morning, Margaret woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Isaac on the barn roof, replacing the damaged shingles. "You are up early," she called up to him. "Wanted to get this done before the heat of the day," Isaac called back. "Figured you would need the barn secure before winter." Margaret shook her head, marveling at his industry. "Come down and have some breakfast first. The roof can wait an hour." Isaac climbed down the ladder and they walked together to the house. Margaret had made biscuits and gravy, and she poured coffee while Isaac washed up at the pump. Her father was already at the table, which was unusual. He still did not speak, but he had started eating with them rather than having Margaret bring food to the porch. They ate in comfortable silence, and Margaret found herself watching Isaac's hands as he broke apart a biscuit. They were strong hands, capable, but there was a gentleness in how he moved that she appreciated. "I was thinking," Isaac said, setting down his coffee cup. "That field to the south, the one you said was too rocky to plow, I could clear the rocks, make it usable, would give you more planting space." "That would take weeks," Margaret said. "I have got time," Isaac replied, and his eyes met hers. "If you want me to stay, that is." Margaret's heart did a little flip. "The room and board agreement still stands," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "You are welcome to stay as long as you like." Something passed between them then, an understanding that this was about more than just farm work. Isaac's smile was soft, almost tender. "Then I will stay," he said. Thomas Prescott looked up from his plate, his eyes moving between Margaret and Isaac. For just a moment, there was clarity in his gaze and something that might have been approval. The weeks that followed were the happiest Margaret could remember since her mother's death. The farm was transformed under Isaac's steady work. The fields were plowed and planted, the barn repaired, the fences mended. He cleared the rocky south field, working in the early morning and late evening when the heat was less oppressive. Margaret worked alongside him, and they developed an easy partnership, anticipating each other's needs, moving together like they had been working side by side for years rather than weeks. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and dreams. Isaac told her about his childhood in Kansas, about his brothers and their endless competitions. Margaret told him about her mother, the stories getting easier to tell with each retelling. She told him about her dream of expanding the farm, maybe getting some cattle, making it into something prosperous again. "You could do it," Isaac said with conviction. "You are one of the most capable people I have ever met, Margaret Prescott." They were sitting on the porch after a long day of work, watching the sun set over the mountains. The spring evening was cool and pleasant, and Margaret had brought out glasses of cold water from the well. "I could not have done any of this without you," Margaret said. "The farm would have failed this year if you had not stopped by." "I think you would have found a way," Isaac said. "You are too stubborn to fail." Margaret laughed, the sound surprising her. She had not laughed in so long. "Is that a compliment?" "The highest one I know," Isaac said, and he reached over and took her hand. Margaret looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused like hers, both marked by hard work. Her heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "Margaret," Isaac said softly, "I know I am just a cowboy passing through. I do not have much to offer, but these past weeks with you have been the best of my life. You are strong and smart and beautiful, and I find myself thinking that maybe Montana is exactly where I am supposed to be." Margaret could hardly breathe. "Isaac, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted. "I just needed you to know that you are remarkable, and any man would be lucky to earn your affection." "You are not just any man," Margaret said, her voice barely above a whisper. She turned to face him fully, her hand tightening on his. "You saw me when no one else did. You respected me when other men would have dismissed me. These weeks with you have been the happiest I have had in 2 years. I wake up looking forward to the day because I know I will see you, work beside you, talk with you. I think I am falling in love with you, Isaac Turner, and that terrifies me." Isaac's eyes widened, and then he was smiling, that wonderful warm smile that made her heart flutter. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because you said it yourself. You are a cowboy passing through. What if you decide to move on? What if this is just a temporary stop for you?" Isaac stood up, pulling Margaret to her feet. He took both her hands in his green eyes intense. "I said I was a cowboy passing through. Past tense. Margaret, I want to stay. I want to help you build this farm into everything you have dreamed of. I want to be by your side, working with you, living with you. I want to court you properly, and if you will have me, I want to marry you." Margaret's breath caught. "You want to marry me?" "More than I have ever wanted anything," Isaac said. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks. But when you know, you know. And I know that you are the woman I want to spend my life with." Margaret felt tears streaming down her face, but for once they were tears of joy. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I want that too. All of it." Isaac let out a whoop of joy and picked Margaret up, spinning her around. When he set her down, he cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs wiping away her tears. "May I kiss you, please?" Margaret whispered. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, both of them new to this. But then it deepened, becoming something more, a promise of everything that was to come. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. A sound from inside the house made them turn. Thomas Prescott was standing in the doorway, and for the first time in 2 years he was smiling. "About time," he said, his voice rusty from disuse. "I was wondering when you two would figure it out." Margaret's hand flew to her mouth. "Pa, you spoke." Thomas stepped out onto the porch, moving slowly like a man waking from a long sleep. "Been listening for weeks now. Watching you two work together, seeing my daughter happy again. I have been lost in the dark, Margaret, but seeing you with this young man, it reminded me that there is still light in the world, still things worth living for." Margaret rushed to her father, throwing her arms around him. He held her tight, and she felt his shoulders shake with sobs. "I am sorry, little girl. I am so sorry. I left you to carry everything alone, and that was not fair." "It is all right, Pa," Margaret said, crying too. "You are here now. That is what matters." Thomas pulled back and looked at Isaac. "You planning to marry my daughter?" "Yes, sir," Isaac said without hesitation. "If she will have me and if I have your blessing." Thomas studied him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "You have been good for her, good for this farm. You have my blessing, but you hurt her and you will answer to me." Isaac shook his hand firmly. "I would never hurt her, sir. I love her." "Good," Thomas said. "Now I believe we have a farm to run. I have been sitting idle long enough." The transformation in Thomas was not instantaneous. He had good days and bad days, times when the grief would pull him back into silence. But more and more, he was present, working alongside Margaret and Isaac, slowly rebuilding his strength and his spirit. The farm began to thrive under their combined efforts. Isaac and Margaret were married in Jerome 3 months later, in the small church on Main Street. It was a simple ceremony, with only a handful of guests, but it was perfect. Margaret wore her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her taller frame, and she carried wildflowers that Isaac had picked that morning. When Isaac slid the simple gold band onto her finger and promised to love her forever, Margaret felt a completeness she had never known. They spent their wedding night in the newly repaired farmhouse, in the room that had been Margaret's parents'. Thomas had insisted, moving himself to the smaller room that had been Margaret's. As Isaac carried her over the threshold, Margaret laughed with pure joy. "What is so funny, Mrs. Turner?" Isaac asked, setting her down gently. "Mrs. Turner," Margaret repeated. "I never thought I would have this. Never thought anyone would see past the farm girl covered in dirt to the woman underneath." Isaac cupped her face in his hands. "I saw you from the very first moment. Saw your strength, your determination, your beauty. You took my breath away standing in that field, refusing to give up. I knew right then that I had found something special." Their first kiss as husband and wife led to more, and that night Margaret discovered a new kind of joy, a physical expression of the love that had been growing between them. Isaac was gentle and patient, and afterward, as they lay tangled together in the darkness, Margaret felt tears on her cheeks. "Are you all right?" Isaac asked, concerned. "I am more than all right," Margaret said. "I am happy, truly, deeply happy." Isaac pulled her closer, kissing her forehead. "So am I, my love, so am I." The first year of their marriage was hard work but filled with contentment. The crops came in well that fall, the best harvest the farm had seen in years. With the money from selling their wheat and vegetables, they were able to buy 3 head of cattle and another horse. Isaac proved to be as good with animals as he was with farming, and soon they had a small but healthy herd. Thomas continued to improve, though he was never quite the man he had been before his wife's death. He was quieter, more contemplative, but he was present and engaged with the farm and with his daughter's new life. He and Isaac developed a strong bond, working side by side and sharing a mutual respect. Winter came hard that year, with snow piling high around the farmhouse and temperatures dropping below zero. But the barn was secure, the animals were well fed, and the family was together. Many evenings were spent around the fireplace, Thomas carving small wooden figures, Isaac repairing tack and tools, and Margaret sewing or mending. They talked and laughed, and sometimes they sat in comfortable silence, the only sound the crackling of the fire. Margaret discovered she was pregnant in early spring. She had suspected for a few weeks, her monthly courses having stopped and a persistent nausea greeting her most mornings. When she told Isaac, he picked her up and spun her around, just like he had the night they had confessed their love. "We are going to have a baby," he kept repeating, wonder in his voice. "We are going to be parents." Thomas was equally thrilled, his eyes lighting up in a way Margaret had not seen since before her mother's death. "A grandchild," he said softly. "Your mother would have been so happy." The pregnancy was not easy. Margaret was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. But Isaac was attentive and caring, taking on extra work so she could rest, bringing her dry crackers and ginger tea, holding her hair back when she was ill. As her belly grew, he would talk to the baby, telling stories and singing songs he remembered from his childhood. "You are going to be an amazing father," Margaret told him one night as he lay with his head on her swollen belly. "I hope so," Isaac said. "I want to give our children everything." "Love, security, a good home. Children?" Margaret asked, smiling. "Plural?" "Well, one is just the start," Isaac said, grinning up at her. "I was thinking maybe 5 or 6. 5 or 6, Margaret laughed. "Let us see how this one goes first." The baby came in December, during a snowstorm that threatened to keep the doctor from making it out from Jerome. But Dr. Harrison arrived just in time, his horse struggling through the deep drifts. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Isaac paced outside the bedroom, Thomas sitting quietly in his chair, both men powerless to help. When the baby's first cry finally rang out, Isaac burst into the room, not caring about propriety. Margaret lay exhausted on the bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, but she was smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle, and as Isaac approached, the baby turned its head, eyes squinting open. "It is a boy," Margaret said softly. "We have a son." Isaac sat carefully on the edge of the bed, looking down at the tiny face of his child. The baby had dark hair like Margaret and Isaac's green eyes. "He is perfect," Isaac breathed. "You are perfect. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for this gift." They named him James Thomas Turner after Isaac's father and Margaret's. James was a healthy baby with a lusty cry and a strong appetite. He changed the rhythm of the household, his needs dictating the schedule. But neither Margaret nor Isaac minded. They marveled at every little thing he did, every tiny fist that curled around their fingers, every small sound he made. Thomas was transformed by his grandson. He spent hours holding the baby, talking to him in a soft voice, telling him stories about his grandmother. The grief that had consumed him for so long seemed to ease in the face of this new life, this continuation of the family. As James grew, so did the farm. Isaac and Margaret worked hard, expanding the herd, improving the fields, building a new, larger barn. They hired a hand to help during the busy seasons, a young man named Peter who reminded Margaret of how Isaac had been when he first arrived, eager and hardworking. When James was 2 years old, Margaret became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, though she was chasing after a toddler while her belly grew. The second baby, a girl they named Emma Rose, arrived in the spring, during the planting season. She had Margaret's dark eyes and a calm disposition, unlike her energetic brother. The farmhouse rang with laughter and the sounds of children. Isaac proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband, spending his evenings playing with the children, teaching James about the animals and the land, rocking Emma to sleep when she was fussy. "You know," Margaret said one evening as they sat on the porch watching James chase chickens around the yard, "I used to think this farm was a burden, something I had to save because it was my duty. But now it is home, a real home full of love and life." Isaac took her hand, bringing it to his lips. "You built that. Your strength, your refusal to give up, that is what saved this place. I just helped." "You did more than help," Margaret said. "You gave me hope. You made me believe that I deserved happiness, deserved love. Before you, I thought my life would be nothing but work and loneliness. And now I have everything I ever wanted and things I never even knew to dream about," Margaret said. "A partner who respects and loves me, beautiful children, a farm that is thriving, a father who has found his way back to us. I am blessed, Isaac Turner." "We both are," Isaac said, pulling her close. Life continued to be full and busy. A third child, another boy they named Samuel, arrived 2 years after Emma. Then, when Samuel was 3, twin girls named Grace and Hope were born, much to everyone's surprise and delight. The farmhouse that had once been quiet and sad was now bursting with noise and energy, children running through the rooms, laughter echoing off the walls. Margaret and Isaac worked side by side, managing the farm and raising their children. They had increased the cattle herd to 50 head and added sheep as well. The farm was prosperous, known throughout the region for quality livestock and crops. They hired more help, including a young woman named Sarah to assist Margaret with the household and the children. Thomas lived to see all 5 of his grandchildren born, and he passed away peacefully in his sleep when Samuel was 5 years old. It was a sad time for the family, but the grief was tempered by the knowledge that Thomas had found peace in his final years, had been able to move beyond the darkness that had consumed him after his wife's death. "He told me once," Margaret said to Isaac the night after the funeral, "that our love brought him back to life, that seeing us together reminded him that joy was still possible. He was a good man," Isaac said, "and a wonderful grandfather. The children will remember him." As the children grew, they each found their place on the farm. James, the oldest, showed a natural talent with horses and took over much of the training and breeding. Emma had her mother's mind for numbers and management, keeping the books and handling the business side of the farm. Samuel loved working with the cattle, and the twins, as they grew older, took charge of the chickens and the large vegetable garden. Margaret watched her children grow with pride and love. She had worried when she was pregnant with James, whether she could be a good mother, whether she knew enough about love and nurturing after spending so many years focused just on survival. But motherhood had come naturally to her, and she found that the same fierce determination that had kept the farm going was now channeled into raising her children to be strong, compassionate, hardworking people. Isaac was the foundation of it all, her partner in every sense of the word. They still worked side by side in the fields when they could, still sat on the porch in the evenings talking about their day. The passion between them had not dimmed with time. If anything, it had grown deeper, more complex, a love built on years of shared experiences, challenges overcome, joys celebrated. "You ever regret it?" Margaret asked him one evening when they were alone. The children were all in bed, and they sat on the porch swing that Isaac had built the year Samuel was born. "Stopping here that day instead of moving on, you could have had your own ranch, been your own man instead of helping to run my family farm." Isaac looked at her, his green eyes serious. "This is my ranch, Margaret, mine and yours together. And I am my own man, exactly the man I always wanted to be. Strong enough to work hard, wise enough to appreciate what I have, lucky enough to have found you. I have never regretted a single moment of our life together. Not even when the twins were newborns and neither of us slept for 6 months. Margaret teased. Isaac laughed. Not even then, though I will admit there were moments when I questioned our sanity. They sat in comfortable silence, the swing creaking gently. The Montana night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds. Margaret leaned her head on Isaac's shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him, soap and leather and something indefinably Isaac. I love you, she said softly. I fall more in love with you every single day. And I love you, Isaac replied. My strong, beautiful, amazing wife. You are still the most impressive person I have ever met, Margaret Turner. You work harder than any 3 men, you raised 5 incredible children, you built this farm into something remarkable. You take my breath away. Margaret smiled, remembering a day nearly 20 years ago when a cowboy on a paint horse had stopped on the road and noticed her pulling a plow. She had been at her lowest point then, barely holding on, exhausted and alone. And he had seen her, really seen her, and recognized her strength instead of her weakness. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For seeing me, for loving me, for building this life with me. Isaac kissed the top of her head. Thank you for letting me stay. For taking a chance on a drifting cowboy. For making me a part of your family. They sat together as the stars wheeled overhead, 2 people who had found in each other exactly what they needed. The farm around them was quiet now, the children sleeping, the animals settled for the night. But it was a good quiet, a peaceful quiet, the quiet of a place that was well loved and well tended. In the years that followed, the farm continued to prosper. James married a sweet girl from Jerome named Catherine, and they had 3 children of their own, building a house on the far edge of the property. Emma married a banker and moved to town, but visited often with her husband and 2 daughters. Samuel took over most of the cattle operation, proving to have an instinct for breeding that resulted in some of the finest stock in Montana. The twins, Grace and Hope, both married brothers from a neighboring ranch, and the 2 couples built homes side by side, creating a small compound of family. Margaret and Isaac became grandparents many times over, and their home remained the center of the family. Sunday dinners saw the house filled with children and grandchildren, the long table that Isaac had built groaning under the weight of food, laughter and conversation flowing freely. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Isaac surprised Margaret with a trip to Helena, the territorial capital. It was the first time they had left the farm for more than a day since their honeymoon, and Margaret felt almost giddy with the adventure of it. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, walked the streets hand in hand like young lovers. This is wonderful, Margaret said as they stood on the balcony of their hotel room looking out over the city. But I miss home. Me too, Isaac admitted. I guess we are farm people through and through. You think the children are managing all right without us? Isaac pulled her into his arms. They are fine. James knows what he is doing and the others will help. Stop worrying and enjoy this time with your husband. Margaret laughed and kissed him. You are right. I am just not used to having nothing to do. I can think of a few things to do, Isaac said, his eyes twinkling. That night, in the privacy of their hotel room, they rediscovered each other with the passion and tenderness that had always marked their physical relationship. Afterward, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Margaret thought about how blessed she was. 25 years of marriage, and she still felt the same flutter in her stomach when Isaac touched her, still felt her heart race when he smiled. They returned to the farm refreshed and ready to dive back into work. Montana had become a state the year before, in 1889, and there was a sense of progress and possibility in the air. The railroad had reached Jerome, making it easier to ship cattle and crops to market. The town had grown, with new businesses and families arriving regularly. Margaret was now 45 years old, her dark hair streaked with silver, her hands more gnarled than ever from decades of work. But she was still strong, still capable, still the driving force behind the farm's success. Isaac was 49, his hair completely gray now, lines deeply etched into his face from years in the sun. But his green eyes still sparkled when he looked at his wife, and his love for her had never wavered. As they grew older, they gradually turned more of the daily operations over to their children and hired hands. They still worked every day but at a more measured pace, focusing on the tasks they enjoyed most. Isaac spent his time with the horses, and Margaret maintained a large garden and oversaw the household. Their 50th wedding anniversary was a grand celebration. All 5 of their children were there with their spouses and children, along with friends from throughout the region. A huge feast was prepared, and there was music and dancing. Margaret wore a new dress, made by Emma as a gift, and Isaac wore his best suit. As they danced together under the Montana sky, surrounded by the family they had built and the life they had created, Margaret felt a profound sense of peace and gratitude. 50 years, she said, looking up at Isaac. Can you believe it? Best 50 years of my life, Isaac replied. And I am looking forward to 50 more. I do not think we will make it to 100, Margaret laughed. Then however many years God gives us, Isaac said seriously. I want to spend every one of them with you, loving you, working beside you, building this life we have made together. Always, Margaret promised. They continued to dance as their grandchildren watched, as their children smiled, as the stars came out one by one. 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had built something beautiful together through hard work and devotion and love. The farm that had nearly failed all those years ago when a young woman had pulled a plow alone through rocky soil was now a thriving enterprise, spanning hundreds of acres, supporting multiple families, known throughout the state for quality and integrity. And at the center of it all was a love story that had started with a cowboy noticing a farmer's daughter who worked harder than any man. Isaac and Margaret lived to see their 60th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. They passed away within months of each other, Isaac first, then Margaret, as if she could not bear to be parted from him for long. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the farm, the mountains rising in the distance, the land they had loved and tended spread out below them. Their legacy lived on in the family that continued to work the farm, in the values they had instilled in their children, in the love that had built something lasting and strong. And sometimes when the wind blew across the fields, the older family members swore they could feel their presence, still watching over the land, still together, still in love. The Turner farm remained in the family for generations, a testament to the power of hard work, determination, and love. And the story of how it all began, of a cowboy who stopped on a dusty road and saw a woman pulling a plow, was told and retold, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary love stories start with someone simply taking the time to notice, to see beyond the surface to the remarkable person underneath. Margaret Prescott had worked harder than any man, driven by necessity and determination, and a refusal to give up on her family's land. And Isaac Turner had noticed, had seen her strength and her spirit, and had fallen in love with the most remarkable woman he had ever met. Together, they had built a life, a family, a legacy that would endure long after they were gone, rooted in the Montana soil they had both loved so well.